Hi there, Rob Sligh and David Karofsky here with the Family Business Consulting Group. Rob and I recently did a webinar on how to build effective boards for family businesses, and we did that back on September 2nd. There was some great Q&A during that session, but unfortunately we couldn't get to all the questions. So Rob and I thought we'd do a quick video answering some of the really key questions that came out during that webinar. We're going to go through a few questions. You can look at the full webinar on our link below on the description on the YouTube video, and you can certainly check that out and have some fun and enjoy that video. So Rob, what were some of the questions that came up today?
Yeah, one of the things had to do with rising generations and independent directors. How can rising generations be developed for family governance? You have any ideas?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. I get that question a lot because I think governance is a growing theme in family businesses. I'm actually working with a client right now. It's a seventh generation family business, and we have built out a full family governance, and they have an active board as well, a full performing board. But the family members are starting to, as the younger generation is growing up, they are starting to get more and more interested in this governance concept. So we have created a family council. And what happens is basically the family assembly, which is effectively the entire family of about 35 people. They will vote a subset of family members to serve on a 2-year term for a family council, which represents about 7 or 8 people that are on the council. And they do a lot of planning for the family. They do policy creation. They're developing a handbook. So they are starting to do some formal family governance. One of the nice things is the members who sit on the family council also have an opportunity to attend a board meeting and get a feel for what it's like to be on the board, knowing that they can't vote or anything, but they really can kind of sit back and look at what the flow of a board meeting is.
Yeah, that's terrific. And of course, the annual shareholder meeting provides an opportunity for shareholders, young owners to come in and experience that as well.
Yep.
Shareholder annual meeting is sometimes perfunctory, but can be expanded if part of the purpose is to train next gens. What about independent directors? What's your experience on that, David?
So independent directors, I think, can be an incredibly valuable component to a performing board. The question I will always ask the family is, are you ready to hear outside advice and thoughts? And put outside members other than shareholders in a position to make decisions at a governance level. And if you are, then I think bringing on independence can be an incredibly strong attribute to a real performing board and a performing company, family business for that matter. It all depends on where you are in the life cycle.
Yeah. And independent directors, for those who are just wondering, what does that mean? It's not a family member, not somebody who's past or current leader in the business. It's not somebody affiliated with the business as a customer or a supplier, but it's a independent risk-taking peer who doesn't have any axe to grind or anything to gain or lose by their participation on the board, but they have some great experiences to bring and some experiences to share that may have relevance.
It's also, it's not your attorney, it's not your accountant. You're paying those advisors already. It's truly an independent. It's also not mom or dad's golf buddy or army pal. It's truly an independent that meets the criteria that the board sets for who they're looking for to really add value to the board.
Some people who gave us questions in chat at the webinar that we couldn't get to asked about when's the right time to involve independent directors in the board. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think it depends on the evolution of the family. One of the things that we went through in the webinar was kind of where are you in the evolution of your family business, generation 1, 2, generation 3 or 4. What we have found is that often in generation 1 and 2, we tend to start with a family board or maybe into an advisory board. It's what we start to see in generations 2 and 3 and even into 4 is when we start to add some independent members. So again, classic consultant answer, it's going to depend. But I think as you start to get into the second, third, and fourth generation of a family business, that's when you want to start to look at bringing on independence. It also depends on the size of the business too, I think, Rob.
Yeah, another way of looking at it is revenue. And sometimes 20 million is about the revenue benchmark that you have enough critical mass, enough ability to pay outside directors that it makes sense. Prior to that, it might make sense more to have a mentor or a consultant. But after that, a board of independent directors that includes independent directors can be very valuable.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what about the ideal mix of inside directors and independent directors? We often get questions on this. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think ultimately to get to a full performing board, you're probably looking at having a majority of independents at some point. Building that is really key. So starting off, you might add one independent or two independent for the first year or two as you start to get your kind of your feet underneath you and feel comfortable with having some independent thoughts and decision makers at your governance level. But ultimately, I think it'd be great to have, four independents and three family members in the board and the family I was referring to earlier. They have a full independent board. They have four, not full independent, but they have an independent performing board where they have four independent board members and three family members. And I think that's a really nice mix.
Yeah, that's a great mix. And of course, what we see in our longitudinal studies is that boards with three or more independent directors perform better over the long run than businesses that have fewer independent directors. So a vision, as you say, of three or more independent directors is a great vision. And then, of course, we get into that worry. Well, what happens when there's a majority of outside directors? I'm afraid of losing control. And we always remind people that it's the majority owners that have the control and the directors who serve at the pleasure of the majority owners.
That is, Rob, I think in my board development work, that is one of the primary concerns of the shareholder groups is I don't want to lose control. And we always have to remember them. You don't lose control because you vote the board. If you're not happy with the way the board's performing, you can make some changes.
Yeah, exactly right. Another question that came up, what skills should family owners look for when driving for that high performance board?
I always look at the business, at the family business first. And I look at, and each business is different. So I really look at, and in fact, I do what I call a gap analysis with the board. And I say, what are we missing with the existing talent, either through family members or through existing independents? What do we have? What do we need? And so, you want independence, you want a group of peers, you want people who think differently yet can act collegially with each other, can disagree without being disagreeable, right? And create a healthy friction, yet are filling gaps in the business, whether you're trying to go international or distribution or manufacturing. It all depends on your business. But I think you want a healthy mix of both business acumen that fill some gaps that you might not have, but also the ability to work with a group of individuals to form consensus to make some decisions.
Yeah, that's good stuff. It's about looking at the future and what the business needs and how independent directors can help fill those gaps that you talked about. And typically listening skills and relevant experience sharing is going to be important in the criteria.
Yeah, I think family business background, if possible, is helpful because there are family business dynamics that are going to inevitably will most likely come into play.
You're right. We often get this question. I think we got several of them in the September 2nd webinar about compensation. What should I pay outside directors? And I'm afraid that there's quite a range there, but what guidance can we give, David?
Well, there's certainly there's definitely research out there to support appropriate compensation depending on the size of the business, even the industry that you're in. And so there is definitely research available. And if you want some more information about that, you certainly can contact us and learn about that. But kind of at a broad level, we're seeing an average annual retainer of somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000 with maybe a $2,000 to $3,000 per meeting additional fee. And maybe there's some committee fees on top. So again, it's a broad stroke. It does depend on the size of your business. It depends on the industry you're in. I think the bottom line is there are professional board members out there. There are independents who really just want to serve and give back. But you want to ensure that people's time is valued, and everybody's got a different number on that. But you want to know that if you're asking them to do the work and prepare and attend the quarterly meetings and do the work in advance and read the work and maybe be on a committee, their time is valuable and they should be compensated for that.
That's right. Even though they don't do it for the money, they still want to feel their time is valued.
Yep.
You're right. Well, what's the best length of time for an independent director to serve on the board?
Oh boy, I've seen ranges on this. I'll look at it at a time, but I will first answer it in as long as that individual is still adding value to the board and is able to be present and attend and read the materials and really, like I said, add value. I'm in some ways less concerned about the time. That being said, I think it's healthy to have term limits to reevaluate a board member's performance every couple of years, for example, and ask, are they performing up to it? I suggest you do performance evaluations of the board to ensure that they are performing and make changes. And it also may mean making changes depending on the shifts within the business. So I have a hard time putting a time frame on it. Rob, you may look at it differently, which is totally cool. I sometimes have a hard time. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, a lot of businesses have annual elections. So the question is, what time frame do you want the independent director to be thinking about? And typically, it takes a year to understand the family and the business itself. So you don't want them thinking about a year. But if at the front end you talk with the independent director about a 3 to 5 year commitment, I think that's a nice piece of time. Of course, they still serve at the pleasure of the majority owners, and that doesn't mean that it's going to be valuable for them to serve that long. But they should have the mental framework that they're making a multi-year commitment. Now, on the other end, after 10 years or so, even if they're adding a lot of value to the board, it would be a good time to consider whether a fresh outlook would be valuable to the board going forward. So there's some flexibility in there, and I think rightly so.
Yep. Good points.
So what about age limits? This is kind of related to term limits, but what are your impressions on age limits and their appropriateness?
Again, I think keeping an open mind on age limits is an important piece. I've designed boards where the shareholders felt that maybe at age 75 is probably the right age to come off the board. I've seen it at age 80. I've seen it all over the map, and so I'll always go back to what's the business makeup, what's the makeup of the family, what type of talent are you looking for? Can the person continue to actively contribute to the board? But my guess is somewhere in the mid 70s is probably the appropriate age to start thinking about, are these the right people to continue to have on the board?
Yeah, and another aspect is what age do people act? Because I think we've all seen 70-year-olds that are incredibly energetic and active and engaged in business, and those who are a decade or even more younger than that who've really checked out and maybe more interested in Florida and the golf course than business. So it does depend on how people are acting. And for that reason, a lot of businesses have some flexibility on the age.
Yeah. Yep. Good thought.
Well, those were some great questions, I thought. And David, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. So great questions. And if you attended the webinar, thank you. If you're thinking about attending the webinar, check it out. There's some really good information there that Rob and I have provided. I hope you enjoyed listening to our Q&A. If you want to learn more about the Family Business Consulting Group, you can check out our new website at www.thefbcg.com. Thanks and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.